Hey guys, welcome back to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. It's always great to have a guest who was previously on the show return, but it's not this, I guess, normal for the show to have somebody who was on way back early on, and now 4 years later, we get to welcome back our friend Mo Isom to the show. She was on episode 4 way back in April of 2017. So much has changed in her life and in mine, quite frankly, since we last spoke on the podcast. And it's great to welcome a friend to the show as well. She's got a new book we'll tell you about in a second. Mo Isom Aiken, welcome to Sports Spectrum. Welcome back. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. This is exciting. It feels good to be back. I can't believe it's been 4 years. You just said
Right?
that, and it puts some things in perspective, and that's startling. It's been a while, but
It
what episode
has.
number is this now? Or what
Oh
what
my,
range are you in?
700, I think,
Oh,
Mo. It's
goodness.
crazy.
Wow. We
It's
can always
crazy.
say I was in the first five. There we
You
go.
were in the first five. It's some kind of MySpace thing, right? Was that your top eight back in the MySpace days? Is that what that
Something
was?
like that.
First five? Wasn't that like I don't even remember. That was like a cell phone company that had your first five,
Yeah,
you
like
know,
top.
phone.
I don't even remember. You know what? This will young age me some. I wasn't even a MySpacer. I was I got in right when Facebook was becoming where it like you had to be invited to Facebook and it was
Yeah,
just within schools,
yeah.
but I wasn't allowed to have a MySpace. I was a little too young then. So
Okay,
I'm
okay.
revealing probably most people listening maybe had their top eight on MySpace, but
You're not revealing that you're young because, and I'll say you are young, obviously. You're much younger than me, but you're going on 4 kids now and another new book with 3 books. Haven't you written every book with when you were pregnant too, by the way? Isn't that
they
kind of how
synced
it's
up.
worked?
Yep. I signed and wrote the first one and was pregnant with my first.
Mm-hmm.
Wrote the second one while I was expecting my second, and then began writing this third one and found out I was expecting my third. But this one actually took me a longer stretch. So, in the time of writing it, had a third. Now we're growing a fourth. It's been a lot. It's life through a fire hose around here, but
I
it's
can only imagine. And just thinking about what last year was like, maybe we start there with the pandemic. It's been just about a year as we record this that the pandemic was declared. This is gonna air right before the release of the new book, April 6th. What's this last year been like for you as someone who speaks and travels and goes around, but also you're a mom, like you said, 3 kids and a husband and a wife to Jeremiah, your husband. Like, what's this past 12 months been like for you?
That's a great question. It has probably similar to what everyone has navigated. It has just felt like a shaking. It seemed like it came like a right hook. And on the practical, logistical front, I mean, I guess we're coming up, like you said, on the 1 year anniversary. The day that it was, I guess, declared a pandemic and things shut down, everything we had planned for the year was no longer either
Stopped.
canceled or, you know, are still in the process of rescheduling or maybe went digital on a few fronts. But most everything that we had prepared by way of traveling, ministering, pouring out where we were going to speak and how we were serving, it just all not only stopped, it all just stopped with one big question mark. And so, as I'm sure so many people listening navigated, it's been a shaking, but it's been the most beautiful thing as well. It's like it stopped everything, and maybe the initial response was a little bit of panic, but then our faith has grown, our dependence has grown. It kind of shook everything and every way we did things and brought us back to the most bare foundation and healed some stuff. I mean, we were going hard before. And I'll even say from the maternal perspective, I was traveling, I want to say in October of 2019, I spoke 19 times in a month. I mean, it was
Wow.
just a lot. And I think sometimes when you're in it, you're exhausted, you feel the weight of it, but also the adrenaline just kind of keeps you juggling all the things. And it wasn't until 2020 kind of shook and stopped everything that it actually allowed us to assess, hey, is the way we're doing things the best way? Because I'm still right now and I'm home and this is rich and this is good and this is healing. And our whole family dynamic shifted in such a beautiful way. And there were definitely challenges. We the book is on intimacy with God, and it was the very thing that sustained us through this whole year, because there was deep need at different times and confusion and wrestling points and a lot of challenges. But it was also, I think, one of the biggest years of growth for myself as an individual, for our family, just for our community, that tight knit dependence on one another, and how that was just really beautifully lived out. It was hard, but it was holy. I like to link those words up a lot. I look back and as challenging as to say, I don't think I would have changed too much of it, because it helped us shake things down to the ground and start to rebuild. And that's kind of where we are right now. He's doing a new thing. I don't know if believers are sensing that right now, but there's a restoration, there's a rebuilding occurring. And I think it's good that almost every idol or thing we were dependent on or distracted by really fell. Uh, and man, for those who are still holding fast to the rock that is our salvation, he is beginning to rebuild in a new and fresh way. And I'm excited for what's ahead.
Well, what you'll always be able to tell, your kids and your husband and whoever else is in your life for the next 30 years is that you have a quarantine baby and a quarantine book.
This is true. I want to say I almost have two quarantine babies. I have the baby that's growing due to quarantine,
Yep.
but also my youngest was only a few months old, really, when the pandemic hit. And anyone listening who's had a small child through this, a baby, such developmental time that you don't even realize these kids are going to be a little different, maybe a little quirky, like the
Yeah.
socialization factor different, what they're used to when things start getting, maybe busier again or out and about. I've just found Ronan, my youngest, he's a little different on that front. I call him my quarantine baby. And so yeah, raised one and then conceived one all in that span of time. And they're both special. But
Oh,
about to birth a
absolutely.
book and a baby all at once. So
Right. Who knew? And by the way, the book, for those that are asking, it's fully known. And I'll mention that. I have mentioned that in the intro and I'll mention that on the back end too, but it's called Fully Known, an invitation to true intimacy with God. Isom Aiken is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. So you were an LSU All-American goalkeeper. That's the sports connection. And people can hear your story. This is what I really want people to do after we're done. I'll put it in the show notes to go back to one of the early episodes. It was episode 4, way back when, but we still have that link. I want people to go listen because that's where they can hear all of what you went through at a younger age. And I don't want to rehash all of that because, again, it would take 2 more hours and we've already had that conversation. So I'll link that in the show notes and people can go back and listen to your journey. But I'm wondering, as you get older and your kids are getting older, the idea of sports in the family. And as a LSU goalkeeper, like, do you want your kids to participate in sports and be active in sports? And do you see sports as a way for them to kind of connect and cultivate relationships and all the things that you got to do when you were younger?
yeah, that is a great question. My answer might be a little different from most. We are kind of, my oldest is 5, so we're still so early on this front, but already talking about praying through what that looked like. My husband was an athlete as well. He played football and played up into college, but also was Air Force, so they moved around constantly. So wasn't quite as consumed, I guess, as I was. He was from a much bigger family. We are on track for a larger family, and so his even sports experience looked probably more casual, more relational, more recreational, I guess. A lot of changes, moving, had to kind of roll with the punches. Whereas my sports experience was incredible. I don't ever like to speak a disparaging word because it was the very thing that was such a huge part of my life. But I think because it was so all consuming, so focused, so driven in from a very early age, knowing what sport, fixed on it, one of the college scholarship, I mean, it really became, I'd almost say an idol in my
Yeah.
family. My family's life centered around Moe's soccer. And there were beautiful things gained from that, for myself on the teammate front, on, learning to be coached, on the skills, on the disciplines. But behind closed doors, there were a lot of challenges on the, family relational front, on, relationship with my sister in different ways, and what it really looks like when a family can become consumed by sport. So we're in the prayer and conversation process, I guess, there right now. It's really challenging, I think, looking at the sports environment right now. I mean, at least where I live, travel baseball, for example, I said my kid's 5, so it's not on our radar. Well, there's already like travel teams for 6 and 7-year-old, thousands of
Absolutely.
dollars parents are pouring in. And I just, again, it's hard to say this because sports were such a defining part of my life, but I think we have to be very careful in allowing them to hold a place that's healthy and not, idolatry. I mean, that doesn't own everything. And for each family, that's probably going to look different. But I mean, I look back and we if there was a sport, we weren't, gathered for worship and fellowship. If there was sport, we weren't, doing X, Y, or Z, or prioritizing. I maybe could list on maybe 2 hands and 2 feet the number of family sit down meals in a week I can remember, because it was sports and practice and this and that. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. That's probably a terrible answer for a sports spectrum podcast.
No, I think
It's,
it's a real question though that
yeah,
people are going to have to think about. And you mentioned 5 and we're not there yet, but it's going to happen quick, right? I
right,
mean, 6, 7, 8, suddenly they're in little league if they decide or you decide that they can play. And
right.
so I think it's a question that a lot of families wrestle, especially those that listen to this show, because the majority of people who listen are people who love sports, but people who love Jesus. And I think there's a tension and a wrestle. I know there was with me, with my daughter, who's
Mhm.
now, by the way, Mo, I think you know this, but she's 17 in a couple months. So she's about
Oh
to
my
graduate high
goodness.
school, which is
No, she's
crazy,
not.
right? It's in driving. So all of that is happening in my world, but that just flew by. But then a lot of families who listen are parents of kids and they wrestle with church and sports. And I know that's even a wrestle at our churches. How much do I want my kid to be in sports and encourage them to go and chase their dreams and have fun, but at the expense of their spirituality and their journey? Like, what is that? How do you wrestle with that? So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's layered. And I mean, I think a beautiful picture that we saw this year, and she's a dear friend, but we saw Maya Moore,
yes.
who at the top of her game, one of the best athletes out there, made some really big choices about prioritizing, different things, at least for this season in life, over sport. And that led to the emancipation of a wrongfully incarcerated man. That led to, goodness, her marriage. I mean, it's led to so many beautiful things. But even just getting to talk, to process with her, to connect with other, former athletes, and who are now kind of in this season of families, starting families, figuring out what does this look like. It's really beneficial to hear a lot of different points of view or perspectives, or honest feedback on, hey, this is what sports was for me, and these were the pros, but these were the cons. And I just think it's a healthy place when we can look at something like that, and um, not think listing the real cons is some degradation of sport in general, or some attack on, the athlete's lifestyle. But it's just healthy to assess the fullness of what's worth it, what's not, what do we say yes to, what do we say no to, what time and in what season are we, investing in various things as they develop us as people. And I just, at the end of the day, if anything takes priority over the fullness of our walk with our maker and who he's, made us to be,
Yeah.
um, then we should assess that and layer through it. So don't put that on my plate yet. My kid's 5. I have a 3-year-old that my mother is insistent start some gymnastics, and I'm like, how are we here? This is so fast.
Well, you have soon to be 4 kids, so you know how quick this thing has flown by, and it's trust me, as a dad to an almost 17-year-old, it's flying by much faster than I would ever have
Light
hoped
speed.
or thought of. It's just nuts. It's just nuts.
Yes.
Isom Aiken is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, the New York Times best-selling author and the former LSU goalkeeper. And it's weird thinking you were known by so many at LSU as that, right? That goalkeeper, that All-American goalkeeper. And now many people know you as a best-selling author and a speaker. But the title of your book is called Fully Known.
Mhm.
So let's unpack the book a little bit and unpack that title and what it means to be fully known.
Yeah, this really was birthed out of, and probably a lot of maybe athletes can resonate with this. This was birthed out of a period in my life. So post sports, but like you said, traveling, speaking, writing, walking really as a believer, a faithful one, obedient. Tell me where to go, God. Tell me what to do. Whatever the cost, we live this out. But doing a lot, and a lot of good things. These aren't, living a double lifestyle type thing. I was really um, in the thick of living out the fullness of what I believed I should be. And I remember sitting in the rocking chair in my nursery with my second child, and one day I just came up for air, it felt like, rocking her in her room. And I had to be honest with myself and realized, like, God, I am doing so many things, good things, but I feel so far from you. I have I missed you? I don't feel the nearness. I don't feel the intimacy. I am dehydrated. I am burnt out. I have been going and doing, and m- I'm missing something, because this can't be the fullness of the abundant, spiritual life that you promised, where we feel like, how am I going to wake up the next morning and keep going? And I remember he brought to my spirit a reminder of a scripture that I think we move past a lot. I did, at least, when we come across it, because it feels scary, it feels weighty. But Matthew 7, it talks about, not all who say to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
Only those who do the will of my Father. Many will say to me, did we not, prophesy, we perform miracles, we cast demons? But I will respond to them, away from me, I never knew you. And I sat back, and in that moment, it struck me. This isn't speaking to a non-believer versus a believer. This is speaking to those who would, at bare minimum, profess with their lips that Christ is Lord. And their reasoning for desiring to enter the kingdom of heaven is rooted in their works, their performance. They're doing many things. Goodness, they're casting demons, they're performing miracles. These are, this is not someone who's sort of flippant with the things of the spiritual realm. This is a deep believer. And yet he's saying, but I never knew you. And that those words just like stung. And yet I was so intrigued. Then what does that mean? Because I want to stand before you and hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. I want to stand before you, like the scripture says, and not tremble in fear, but have been made perfect in love. That I will stand before you and man, rejoice, delight on that day. And so I began to study, and that word new in the Hebrew is yada, which implies intimacy. And this will sound strange, but it's the same version used in the scriptures when you would hear, like, in a sexual nature, Joseph had not yet known Mary, or the man knew his wife. This is the same version of that word that Christ is using. And he's saying, but I never knew you. And I suddenly began to realize, man, if the whole of fulfilling the Father's will, as Christ has just said, if the whole of standing before him and hearing, well done, centers on this, what does that mean? To intimately and deeply be known by him, and in turn know him to the same degree. And God just began to explode my mind and my heart with the beauty of not just doing, but what it means to really be with him. It's not just the doing, it's the being, what it means to be in intimate relationship, to allow the depths of myself beyond the athlete, beyond the mom, beyond the, minister, even like of the word, but the depths of myself to be accessed, to be touched, to be healed, for the hardest, deepest, darkest spots to be worked out, and in that process to know him all the more, and understand his true nature all the more, that he stays, and that he's patient, and that he's kind, and that he wants to work these things out for our good, for our freedom. We have a lot of things, I think, in life, whether it's that performative nature, like what I sort of collided with, or whether it is, and maybe just our even perceptions because of coaches that have been over us in our lives, or authority figures, or fathers, or I know this probably connects with even your layer with Live to Forgive, but we have people in our lives that, whether we realize it or not, their interactions with us have framed our understanding of intimate connection
Yeah.
and what it's like. Um, are they going to leave? Are we putting on a performance, and do we measure up? Like, is it going to be good enough? Or do they use us and abuse us? Or we have so many unhealthy, and I wrote about this stuff in my second book, Sex, Jesus, and the Conversations the Church Forgot, but we've had so many unhealthy experiences with intimacy, that invitation to know him and be known by him beyond the surface level, but those deep places. There's a lot he wants to heal in our perspective of how he loves us there. And man, a lot of words to wrap around saying, I saw how so many elements of my life were kind of colliding, and how he wanted to break through all of them to go into the depths with me, not just the quantity of time in his presence, but the quality, the vulnerability before him. If in perfect communion with God in Genesis, we stood naked and unashamed before him, then I believe the return to the garden, the return and the redemption, is that his Holy Spirit works out in us. Our relationship with Christ works out in us, where we would again stand naked and unashamed spiritually before him. This is all of me. You've seen and tended to every part. I'm not hiding anything. And if we got really honest, there's a lot of pieces of ourselves we haven't let anyone into those degrees to, much less God.
Yeah.
And that was really what catapulted this journey of understanding what really mattered, and understanding, that being known and knowing God in those degrees of depth and detail is the most satisfying and fulfilling thing, and is the thing that keeps our tank full, is the thing that keeps us going forward, because we're walking in step with him, versus
Yes.
performing and trying our best and doing everything we can and feeling totally wrung dry.
Mm, that's so well said, Isom Aiken. And the book, again, is called Fully Known, An Invitation to True Intimacy with God. It's releasing April 6th. So it made me think, when you were talking about that moment when you were like, I feel far away from you.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people who listen to this show, and I'm guilty of this too, and even some people who work in the ministry field,
Mhm.
that's my job. My job is ministry, right? With Sports Spectrum and with PAO, and bringing the name of Jesus into conversations, and providing outlets for people to hear about God.
Mhm.
But I noticed that was replacing, in some cases, my own personal relationship with
Right.
God, because I was working in ministry. So I'm like, yeah, I'm talking with Isom Aiken about Jesus right now. Like, that's ministry, right? That's,
Mhm.
but that doesn't replace my relationship. I'm wondering if you've seen that. And maybe that's what you meant when you said you feel far away, that you were doing so much for him, but
Mhm.
you weren't connecting with him.
Right. Yes. Yeah. A very big chunk of it, is absolutely what you're saying. And I'm going to use some words that will feel a little startling and jolting, but it's the very thing that he started to help me see and understand, um, w- what he cares about, what the heart of God really cares about on this front, because that you just described is like a virus.
Mm.
in the church. It's problematic first and foremost that we corporately even think I would need to be in this vocational field of ministry to be like ministering with my life.
Right.
Because each and every kingdom son, kingdom daughter, wherever we are is our mission field. And it should be the heartbeat for every single one of us of where we are purposed to, know him and effectively be tuned in and moving and obeying and speaking as he leads us. But this is where the startling words will come in. I remember on stages, we were going from university to university, ministering around sex, Jesus, and the conversations the church forgot. Just this entire, concept and conversation of sex and God and how these things collide. And I remember standing on the stage one day and thinking, and I think I said it out loud. Don't look up the YouTube clips. I don't know what I've said at certain universities, but I was kind of disturbed in my spirit because I was looking out to thousands of college kids. And this was to women's conferences. This was just the moment, but this was sort of taking in these years of ministry. And it was almost looked like concert goers who were so there to just consume.
Mm.
Man, I remember at one conference, there was someone who came up on the stage and was talking about giveaways of free things and merch. And the people were just going crazy and wanted it. Then the next person who came up was doing a giving message on pouring back in and shared this beautiful, powerful testimony of sacrifice in her life. And it was like crickets. And so I think I said something at that conference too, of like, wait, we've got a heart posture issue. But I just remember standing at this university and the word the Lord gave me was, oh, how we have fallen victim to masturbatory faith. And I just thought,
Wow.
pardon? Like, granted,
Yeah.
I'm ministering in this whole, area of sex and sexuality, but by definition, what that word means is self-serving, self-seeking. Man, our faith is, by my own timing, by my own desire. When I want it, God, give me the miracle. This consumptive, self-serving faith, but really it's actually void of true intimacy. No fruit can be born. It's a one-sided act,
Mm.
and it is void of true connection. It's counterfeit. And he started using these visuals of different, like, broken sexual pieces of our story that we could understand in the natural, but saying to me, this is how my church is perceiving intimacy with me. This is counterfeit. This is counterfeit. This is counterfeit. And
Wow.
the very thing that you just said, that we're, doing a lot, we're working, yet we're not personally in that intimate presence. We're not allowing the Holy Spirit to sanctify, to minister to us, to heal. Like, we aren't actually with him. We are just presenting him to everyone else. It's deeply problematic because it all ends up being counterfeit connection. And the problem is that the enemy loves that. He wants us very consumed by that. He wants us busy and strung out and Marthaing. I love Martha, don't get me wrong. I'm a Martha. So, and the Martha and Mary story, I feel for her. But God's invitation, what he says we should concern ourselves with, what Jesus even rebukes Martha for in that moment, he says, Mary has found it and it will not be taken from her. And Mary was at the feet of Christ, consuming his word in his presence personally. And the enemy is fine with us feeling like we get this God thing and yet failing to sit at his feet. Because in all of these counterfeit forms of intimacy, like I sort of alluded to with the masturbatory faith, they can't actually bear fruit. There's no seed sowing. There's no actual connection with God. Think of it in the light of physical intimacy. A husband and a wife come together. This is how we're 4 kids deep in 6 years. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But there is an actual exchange. there's a beautiful covenantal, vulnerable exchange that sows life, and that life grows, and that life is born forth. Well, take it to the spiritual side. It requires an actual connection with God in prayer, in fasting, and pressing in and seeking his word, where seed is really sown, that the work that he desires we actually do, this work born of the Spirit, is conceived in us and grows, and we start living missionally and focused and fully empowered by him because we've been with him. And it's the rhythm of our lives to draw near as he draws near to us. And it's these aren't my harsh words. This is the Bible that says, like, the works born of our own flesh, of our own ideas, of our own efforts, they're like filthy menstrual rags.
Yeah.
The works born of the Spirit, man, even fire could come and refine. You could have a shaking like 2020, and those things that were actually born of him will stand. And I'm like, it's a lot to unpack, but
Yeah.
it's the beauty of what the book digs into. I realized in that moment, just seeing those parallels and realizing the connections of, like, well, I get in the natural, of course, that's not a real connection. Oh, now it's clicking in the spiritual of me coming and solely consuming, or wanting what I want from God when I want it, but not actually laying down my life for what he wants to build his kingdom. That's problematic. And when I saw it from that perspective, I realized, okay, I it's not just that I can stop and need to shift some things. I
Yeah.
must reprioritize and find my priority framed around what he said. If there's what Jesus says to Mary, if there's anything to be concerned with, let it be this. And he's
Mm.
looking at Mary, who's at his feet. She's found what can't be taken from her. And I'm like, he's given us permission to focus on, concern ourselves with something, and that's that we're in his presence personally. And that is beautiful and also hard when you see it and realize it, that it's been the opposite in your own life. And that's why it took me 2 years to write this book instead of 6 months, because I saw it all and it was hard. It was so
Right.
hard to see.
Well, you
And
did say too that there's great cost that comes with true intimacy too, right?
yeah, absolutely. Think of a marriage, think of a relationship. It's not a one-sided situation where we're there solely for our gain. Christ has paid the ultimate price. He's done what we cannot do.
Yeah.
But the invitation is to not make a mockery of that, to receive that mercy, to receive that grace, to receive the gift of the Holy Spirit in us, and to be willing in turn in this covenantal love, to lay down whatever he calls us to lay down, to let him work through whatever he wants to work through. And that part, if we get real, that's where cost becomes tangible. We're not even just talking about giving of money or possessions or whatever it may be. We're talking about letting him into some of the most wounded parts of our heart and allowing him to minister and heal them, and then shifting our lives accordingly. I think so much of your book, of the Live to Forgive, forgiveness is one of the clearest pictures of that.
Yeah.
That doesn't always feel great to the flesh. There
Yeah.
is cost to God showing, hey, it's not just this person that's done all this wrong. I'm actually calling you to let me heal it, and for you to take a step forward in releasing, in forgiving, in maybe some people changing the trajectory of the way you've been doing things, so that you're a greater reflection of me. And this sanctification process, we run away from that word. That's what this book centers around. It's a beautiful word, but this sanctifying process of being made holy, there's both a receiving, but there's also a giving. And sorry, all of my children have come and pressed their face in the window in front of me and smiled. They're distracted. They're in a rosy thorn bush right now, fighting through the pain to press their face on the glass.
I love it. This is real life, Mo. This is real
This is
life.
real life. This is 2021, our Zoom year of Zoom.
That's it.
But yeah, it's just no marriage is going to be a fruitful marriage if it's one person putting in all the effort and the
Right.
other reaping of the spoils and giving nothing in return.
Yeah.
There is a working out of our salvation with fear and trembling. There's a co-laboring with Christ. There is a, you know, invitation to intimate exchange that requires a lot of us, and every bit of it is worth it. And
Mm.
that's the great promise of the gospel. It's worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth it. I'm with you and it's worth it. And you have to live it to experience and really know that. Um, but it's worth it.
Well, I hope everybody listening was challenged, and I hope everybody listening will go out and get Fully Known, an invitation to true intimacy with God. It releases April 6th. I think this is scheduled to release the day before. So it's going to be out. I hope it's another New York Times bestseller for you, Mo. But as we were talking before we started recording, if it helps just the one, and you
Mhm.
find out that it helped that one, it's worth it, right? It's so
Yeah.
worth it. So congratulations on the new book. Congratulations on the fourth child as well. Give my best to your husband, who I know is a listener of this show, and just excited for all that God's doing for you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was a treat.